gente es a cada quien lo que le pone, le nace a la gente poner eso. En sí no es una cosa que te digan, se le pone esto, no, es lo que tú le quieras poner, una manzana, un dulce, marihuana, una veladora, unas flores, eso es de lo que le nace a uno, pero que le nazca de corazón poner las cosas.
All of us at some point in our life has probably had a pimple, so we all kind of know what it's like. You know, even though it's not life-threatening, and this is something I try to remind my patients all the time, acne or bad acne can really hold you back and can really affect how your personality develops.
Mr. Zuckerberg, what year and month did you personally first become aware of Cambridge?
So this is the intro that we had on the last episode 8 of the Tiddlecast. I'm going to let this one play out just so you can hear it, and then we'll touch base. About 2 minutes if you want, 2 to 3 minutes if you want to skip forward.
To a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There is no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we are the imagination of ourselves. Here's Tom with the weather.
So we have good statistical reasons to believe that the random generators are not behaving randomly when there are large-scale events that attract a lot of attention. At this point, we don't know then which direction the arrow of causation goes. We don't know whether it's simply a lot of human minds that are somehow changing randomness, or whether this is a reflection of something bigger.
Now we're going to turn back. We're going to turn back through time and space, just like turning back in the pages of a book. And when I next talk to you,
has some kind of black something. Black something, I don't know.
how old were you when he died?
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never.
Howl for Carl Solomon. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo and the machinery of night, who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high sat up smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats, floating across the tops of cities, contemplating jazz.
To really know life, you've got to be part of life. You must get down and look. You must get into the nooks and crannies of existence. You have to rub elbows with all kinds and types of men before you can finally establish what he is.
The thing that's going to be tricky here is that it's going to be very tempting to use AI as a weapon. It's going to be very tempting. In fact, it will be used as a weapon. So the on-ramp to serious AI, the danger is going to be more humans using it against each other, I think, most likely. That'll be the danger. Yeah.
And that was just a little intro that I put together for the podcast. It was just clips from the 8 episodes that we've been through so far, just quotes from the people we were talking about and ideas that they've come up with. So yeah, there was a little bit of Elon Musk in there. You heard L. Ron Hubbard talking about rubbing elbows with people. Oh, dude, it's well, you got to go back and look at the Tiddleology. I think it was episode 2 or 3. We talked about Scientology, but you know, these religious hipsters, they take it too far sometimes, man. They take it too deep, to use a Raymonism. And by the way, if Raymond doesn't come through today, we apologize. I'm sure he sends out his blessings and his best. But you know, he had a family issue, and so he had to attend to that. So this may be my first. I think it's going to be my first monologue episode. So monologues always work out a little bit differently. There's, less human interaction, so it can come off kind of dry. But fortunately, we had planned for Roswell this week. And so Roswell is like a super interesting subject when it comes to the paranormal and, the phenomenon. And I want to talk about the intro screen. You guys saw right here on the intro screen that the episode where we always put up the working title here, or basically like the subject matter. It's not really the title, but sometimes it is. So with this one, you'll notice that Roswell is the subtitle, and it's a part. And I did that because Roswell is really part of a larger phenomenon, something that's generally referred to by ufologists and stuff like that as the phenomenon. And the phenomenon is really a collection of ideas, phenomenon, events, like Roswell, including Bigfoot, including ghosts and goblins and secret societies. It's the phenomenon is a way to sum up the idea that all of these things may be related intricately. And it's my personal belief, I guess you could say, that these phenomena are in some way related by our lack of understanding in physics and quantum physics. And so I think that once science advances and we start studying unobservable phenomenon or on like phenomena that you can't replicate in a science lab, I think I think we'll gain a better understanding of it. So like whenever it comes to like CERN, these particle colliders and stuff like that are in Europe, and just kind of the advanced atomic research that some of these scientists are doing, I always get really excited. Because that's how we're going to push physics. That's how we're going to build the first warp drive. All that shit is like tied together. So, but we're going to get into it here. So I should start with a little preface. I watched, sometimes I watch Pluto, Pluto's got like some really good, like nostalgic programs and stuff like that on there. And so I was noticing that the old school Unsolved Mysteries from like the 90s, it came out a little bit, I think, before X-Files, but it's kind of all within that same demographic of TV viewers back in the day. And so they just covered, there was a lot of true crime stuff and like mysteries, unsolved mysteries. But occasionally they would do like UFO stuff, and those were always my favorite. It had a different feel to it always. They were dealing with supernatural and super unexplained phenomena. It just wasn't like, humans doing hood rat shit, so I appreciated it. But so I was watching it, and I noticed that the most famous UFO case of all, namely Roswell, was covered by Unsolved Mysteries in season 2, episode 1. If you want to go take a look, and I think it's on demand, available on demand for free on Spotify, or not on Spotify, on freaking Pluto right now. So if you recall, each of those episodes had 2 segments. They would fit 2 mysteries in one like 30-minute episode or something like that. And so in this particular episode, season 2, episode 1, it was segment 2. And it starts out with Robert Stack standing on an air base, Roswell Army Air Base in Roswell, New Mexico. And he's standing in front of, I think it was Hangar 84. They said that, in the intro that the UFO crash or UFO craft that crashed there in Roswell was stored temporarily there on Roswell Army Air Base in Hangar 84. So it starts out with Robert Stack, in his like 1990s FBI overcoat or whatever. And he's giving the, the broad strokes. And so basically those are that in 1947 on July 2nd, and we're going to go in timeline fashion today, I think. July 2nd, 1947, which was a Wednesday. I looked it up. So on this Wednesday, a strange aerial vehicle crashed in a remote field in Roswell, and the metal that was found in this debris field, which we'll talk a little bit about, had strange properties. You know, it wasn't like somebody had like spilled some like aluminum foil or tin cans, or even aircraft aluminum sheet metal. It was different, and so we're going to go into that. So that evening, there was a thunderstorm, which happens, out in New Mexico around that time of year. I'm not sure if it's monsoon season over there at that time, but, it was stated that that's a normal occurrence. And so this electrical storm is going on. And there's this rancher, and he's like winding down at the end of the day, and his name was Mac Brazel, right? And so he was winding down during the storm when he heard a strange crash. Now, there was, thunder crashes going on all over the place, but something about this particular crash sounded different. And so he, in the dramatization, it shows him like going outside, during the storm, and he's like looking out onto his ranch and doesn't see anything. I think he just went back to sleep or whatever. And so the episode at that point switches, and they start interviewing this guy's neighbor. Right now, keep in mind, this episode was probably aired in the mid 90s, I want to say, and or maybe it was early 90s, and so they were interviewing this woman that was there, right? It was Mac Brazel's neighbor. Her name was right here, Loretta Proctor. And so they're interviewing Loretta Proctor. She's an old lady in the episode. She looks to be in maybe her 80s, and like mid 80s. And so, she was there. She was present in 1947. So that's another reason why I wanted to focus on this episode specifically, because it has, witnesses that were present, to the event. You know what I mean? It's got a lot of good footage in there. So, and this is really the episode, just to take a quick sidestep. This was really the episode that formed the foundation of early millennials and late Gen Xers. And it was really the boomers that were producing this stuff. So, for a majority of the people out there right now, apart from young people, this formed the foundation of your parents and grandparents' understanding of the UFO phenomenon. And so that's another reason why I wanted to do this whole thing in parts, because I do believe that the things are related. And over the course of the podcast, just intermittently here and there, I'm going to come back to the phenomenon. I'm going to make this point over and over and over again, and it is that these things are related. In the paranormal field, if you look into it, for a long time, it was understood that Bigfoot people didn't really like get into it with UFO people, and UFO people didn't really get into it with Bigfoot people. There was a kind of tribalism about it. It was weird, but so I don't know why that was the case, but it's the idea of the phenomenon being a united phenomenon, or that all these things are associated, is relatively new, and I think it really makes sense. But anyway, I just wanted to make that point. So, going back to the episode, so Mac Brazel's neighbor, Loretta Proctor, was providing character witness or character testimony on Mac Brazel. She said that he was like a serious, no nonsense, old time cowboy. So not a person that would easily take to like embellishments and stuff like that. He's not gonna blow things out of proportion. He's just a very simple, straightforward kind of dude. Simple man. And she said that basically that he would shoot from the hip. That he was going to be a truthful person. He was a reliable character witness. So it jumps back to the event. That next morning when Mac Brazel woke up, him and his son, I think, according to his son, went out onto his ranch to survey the lands because he wanted to see which areas of his ranch had gotten the most precipitation, because precipitation leads to better grass, and better grass is better for the cattle grazing. So that was his concern. So he went out and started doing that. There's a famous ufologist writer from back in the day named Kevin Randall, and he was the one that provided that story. And that's what about him going out to get the look for the precipitation. And that's when, according to Kevin Randall, he found the wreckage. He couldn't tell what it was yet because the wreckage was like shattered into small pieces, but the debris field was significant. And this is something that they covered briefly in the episode, but it was something that I don't know why I felt compelled to like look into, right? So in the episode, Robert Stack states that the debris field stretched about 3/4 of a mile long and 200 to 300 feet wide, right? And I was curious, like, how big is that, right? And this was even before they started getting into the stuff about weather balloons and shit like that. But I'll circle around to that in just a second. So just to give you a perspective of how big the debris field was. So it stated that it was 200 to 300 feet wide, right? So 300 feet is, similar to, or I think it's like a football field long, right? Because there's like 3 feet in a yard, and there's 100 yards in a football field. So like end zone to end zone, or goal line to goal line, we're talking about a football field wide, right? That's not even how long it is, right? So since that number 300 feet immediately took me to a football field for reference size, I thought, well, how many football fields would it take to cover 3/4 of a mile? And it worked out, like I did all the math, but it worked out to about 6 fucking football fields in length, right? If you got like 6 football fields and put them side by side, the length of that distance would be about 3/4 of a mile long, I believe. So, later when they started talking about the weather balloon theory, because the Air Force initially issued a statement, and we're going to get to that in detail in a minute. But the Air Force initially issued a statement saying that they had caught a flying disc, and they were stating the story that we all know today. And then shortly thereafter, they issued a retraction, and the retraction said that it was just like an experimental weather balloon, right? I've never seen a weather balloon in person, but I've seen pictures of these. I've seen all sorts of stuff. And a weather balloon, when it crashes, is not going to, one, make the shape that this debris field was in, right? Because this debris field is basically like a long rectangle, 3/4 of a mile long, So that's a big fucking debris field. And, the way it's spread out suggests that it landed at speed. It landed with some speed. Because if a weather balloon crashes, it's just going to fall down. It's going to spread out or whatever, over the area that it covers. Maybe it pops, a couple pieces land here and there. But this was metal debris for the most part, and it was stretched out like an aircraft, would crash, in a long pattern. So I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to bring it up. So the debris profile suggests that it's not a weather balloon. To me, I don't know. I'm not like a professional investigator just to qualify that, but yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, and it discounts the weather balloon explanation, in my opinion. But anyway, moving on. So the debris pieces were about 3 to 4 feet long. They're described as being thin as a newspaper and light as a feather, and super strong, shiny and metallic in appearance, but in some ways or some pieces resembled plastic. They weren't really that clear. So there was some slight flexibility to these metal beams. They had seen some I-beams, which looks very similar if you've ever seen like a railroad track. A railroad track underground, it's got like the bottom of the eye, and then it comes up vertically, like the body of a capital letter I, and then it's got that part that the train rolls over, right, which is the top of the capital I. So that's basically an I-beam. So these I-beams were just, big enough to kind of pick up, and there was some flexibility to them, but it was super strong. And on this one piece that they had found that keeps on coming up, they found some hieroglyphic, it's described as hieroglyphic type writing on it. And that's interesting to me because, who doesn't love like a good Egyptian space alien story? But this writing looked like it was embossed, like maybe printed with a laser kind of onto the metal. And it was described as violet in color, which is I thought was cool. You know what I mean? Because in other parts of this series, I think we're going to get into how fiber optics may have come to us via some of this technology. Like some of the technology that started coming out after 1947 was circulated into American industry in order to give us, an edge. And so fiber optics, works based off of spectral colors, colors of the rainbow. So I thought, I'm always kind of like in my conspiratorial brain putting, trying to put two and two together wherever they'll fit. I'm trying to put the puzzle together, and when I see these things that aren't necessarily related but bear some resemblance, I find it interesting. So I thought the violet color and the way they kind of showed the violet color on Unsolved Mysteries, it was, it kind of gave that spectral vibe to it. So, it had this writing. It was described as hieroglyphics, but not exactly hieroglyphics. There was more of a geometric, like a geometry style, aesthetic to the writing. So I thought that was pretty interesting, like mathematical or geometric hieroglyphics. So they said that when they got this debris and tried to crush it in their hand, like you would a piece of foil, it would just pop back out, almost like if you've ever seen that plastic that looks reflective, like it looks like foil but it's plastic, like almost like if you had done that with a piece of that plastic, except when you do that with that plastic, it kind of pops back into place, but there's creases left. And so, and that's not the way the dramatization showed it, or the descriptions that people were giving. It seemed to pop back into place. And I think that there might be like a material now that has been developed. And I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry, but it had something to do with nickel. I'll look it up later and put it in the show notes, but apparently we have metal that resembles these qualities now, but again, came out after 1947, which is when the Roswell crash happened. And so the material was weird. The debris was weird. Later on that afternoon, Mac Brazel decided to drive over to Loretta Proctor and her husband Floyd Proctor's house. Right, that was their nearest neighbor. It was the Proctors, and so he drove over to show him some of the debris, and they seem to remember. I thought the metal was pretty cool, but they seem to remember this piece of. They described it as wood. Loretta Proctor described it as a piece of wood. She said that as they tried to burn it or like carve it out with a knife, it just didn't wear at all. And so that was described as weird. She said back then it looked like a piece of wood, but she said if she had to describe it like today, she would use plastic because according to her, and I didn't look up this factoid, but this is the way she remembered it, plastic, they didn't have plastic. Maybe plastic existed. I can't remember when plastic was invented, but she said that they didn't have plastic. So, yeah, weird debris. Again, another anecdote associated with weird debris. But, you know, after that meeting, you know, they found it interesting or whatever, but I think he told them about the debris field. And so they urged him to report it. They urged him to report it to the cops or whatever. So it wasn't until, that would have been like the 4th of July weekend. So I don't know if he had like celebrations or whatever, but yeah, that next day, Friday, July 4th, it would have been July 4th, and U.S. Independence Day. So, and then the weekend followed, right, which would have been the 5th and the 6th. And we skipped those days because nothing is reported as occurring with reference to the Roswell story that 4th of July day weekend. But on the morning of July 7th, Monday, 1947, Brazel did report the debris to the Roswell sheriff, who then informed nearby Roswell Army Air Base. I don't know if the sheriff went out with them, but he just called the air base and they took it. This freaking air base is like historic, but we'll get into that in a minute. So that was I believe Monday morning, July 7th. Monday afternoon, Brazel ended up leading 2 Army intel officers to the debris field, including Major Jesse Marcel. So far we've been talking about a couple of people. We mentioned, the writer Randall, but in terms of the story, we mentioned Mark Brazel, who discovered it, and his neighbors Floyd and Loretta Lynch. You know, intro another, I guess you could say, central character to the Roswell story, Major Jesse Marcel. He was, I believe, the leading intelligence officer that went out there that day. His name is Jesse Marcel Sr., and that's important because they interview his son, Jesse Marcel Jr., later on. And so Jesse Marcel Sr. is an experienced Army pilot, and during peacetime, he would investigate air accidents, right? And this seemed to be, at the time, an air accident. So, you know, naturally the Air Force sent him, and I believe like a junior grade lieutenant or something like that to help him out. So he couldn't ID the debris. I think, Jesse Marcel, he died in 1982, but before he died, he gave an interview on the subject, which they did cover in Mysterious Universe. And so, again, you know, 90s. And I don't even think that he did this interview for Unsolved Mysteries. I think the interview was taken like on a UFO documentary previously. Like it might have been like the early 90s or even late 80s, if I am judging like the quality of the film correctly. But yeah, so, you know, this interview pops up. There's Major Marcel Sr. And he was saying that when he was out there that he picked up he called it thick, a thick piece of debris, and he tried to bend it, and then he tried to burn it, and they just tried to generally fuck it up, and they couldn't, right? And so he said that he even took like a sledgehammer to one of these pieces, one of the thicker pieces. It was a 16-pound sledgehammer, he said, and tried to fuck it up, and he couldn't. He said that there weren't even scratches on it. Like, you know, that this was like a shiny piece of debris, and there were no fucking scratches on the thing. So that was pretty crazy. Later that evening, again, July 7th, Major Marcel, when he was done, like, I guess collecting the debris or whatever, he was on his way back to the base, but it was late. So he decided to stop by the house, right? And he did show his family this debris. I mean, you know, he didn't know what was going on. Like, I mean, I'm sure he thought it was like important, but maybe at that point he didn't realize what he was sitting on. You know what I mean? Maybe it was an advanced like foreign aircraft or something like that, or some top secret. But I couldn't imagine what was going through Jesse Marcel Sr.'s mind at that point. But the fact that he drove it home and showed his family tells me that maybe he wasn't super concerned with it, or maybe he didn't realize what he was sitting on. Either way, like, his son played with this shit, you know, so they all kind of saw it, you know, and he asked him about the I-beam with the writing, and he was like, son, I don't know what the hell's going on. So he showed his family. Later that morning, which would have been July 8th, which I believe is a Tuesday now, Major Marcel's son, Jesse Marcel Jr., who was an MD, was present at 2 a.m. So that was that night. So that's when it occurred. That's when he was showing his family this. So you tell he was getting home late. So they played with the debris, and that's how we have the description of the writing on the I-beam is through Jesse Marcel Jr. And so that's what went down that night. So real quick, I want to jump over back to the base, right? So the base dispatched Jesse Marcel Sr., but we should talk about what this base was, right? I'm not even sure if it's there still, but Roswell Army Air Base was home to the 509th Bomb Group and the 1st Air Transportation Unit. And the 509th Bomb Group is legendary because they were the Air Force's sole atomic bomb group at that time. So I was like, whoa. I was like, so that led me to think, like, well, when was the Manhattan Project, right? So I had to go look that up. And the Manhattan Project started about 8 years before, in 1939, right? So this is all important. If you're familiar with, like, the intricacies of, like, the Roswell story and, like, aliens and all that shit, you'll know that it seems to me that they are hanging out nuclear sites a lot, and you know, they just so happen to show up like shortly after we developed atomic bombs. Maybe not show up because they're present in art and stuff like that. So maybe they've been here for a while, but they seem to become very interactive with us ever since the advent of atomic energy and the atom bomb. And so I find it interesting that they were hanging out Roswell at the time that our only atomic bomb group was present. I don't know if they did a lot of testing prior to 47, but I mean, they had to have been doing some testing if the Manhattan Project had started in 39. So Roswell Army Airfield was a closed base, obviously because of the security, right? So, I mean, we're way tighter on security nowadays, but back then, I mean, at least you're going to be serious about your only atomic bomb group. You know, that was the secret weapon. So you can imagine there was a significant amount of security required to access the base. So anyway, that following morning, late, you know, during the day on a Tuesday morning, it's believed that at least some of the debris was flown to Wright Field, Army Airfield, which is now Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I believe, near Dayton, Ohio. But there was a short stop at Carswell Air Base outside of Fort Worth, Texas, and so we're going to get to that short stop because there's a little bit of information that we need to throw in there that's important to the story. So that same morning, you know, that the debris is being flown out, there was a colonel named William Blanchard, and he was the 509th commanding officer. He decides to go public with the information, which I thought was very odd because, you know, like, I mean, this is basically the CO of, like, our secret weapon, and he's going public, but, you know, it was a different time, different logic to the way people thought back then, I think. And so, you know, I mean, and also the media was different. We'll get to that in a little bit. But he decides to go public with the information. He calls the base public affairs officer, who's Lieutenant Walter Haut at the time. And I believe they interview him too, Walter Haut. he picks up the phone, and it was Colonel Blanchard, and how it was instructed to write a press release describing the discovery of this crashed disc that had been recovered near Roswell Air Base, and then ordered him to hand deliver it to the local press, like to drive it in and have him put it on the wire, basically, which is what happened. The many rumors were, the press release read in part, and they quote this also on the episode. They say the many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intel office of the 509th Bomb Squadron was fortunate enough to gain possession of the disc through the cooperation of a local rancher. So he went public, and it wasn't very long. I want to say like minutes or hours before this was on the wire, and this was going out everywhere. And I can't remember when the War of the Worlds was, but that was also maybe on everybody's mind, I believe. So interesting time. But the motive for the press release, according to Lieutenant Hott, was to maintain a transparent relationship with the press, because transparency was like still an important part of our national identity back then. We were trying to, prove that you could be strong and vanilla at the same time. Like that was like a very romanticized aspect of like the American psyche, and I want to say in the 40s and 50s, which was, in its own right beautiful, but also, we would say, I think today, incredibly naive. I long for that time too. I was having like a deep discussion with a buddy of mine about probably the same thing. And, it takes strength to, Dave Chappelle, I think his mom said it best. It's like, sometimes you have to be a lion to be the lamb you really are. And so, maintaining that kind of positive outlook on life in an era where everything is just so fucked up and we're so politically divided, that takes strength, and that's kind of beautiful in its own right. But it seems, I don't know, it seems like it's getting rarer and rarer. But I'm going to digress. I go off on these philosophical tangents. So everybody in the UFO genre has heard about this rancher, but not everybody has heard about the soil conservationist. And so we're going to talk about Barney Barnett here in a bit. So Barney Barnett was a soil engineer, soil conservationist, and he was nearby the crash. But like, I think on the other, like on a neighboring ranch or other side of the road, or, maybe it was like BLM, I don't know, but he was just out there, doing his thing. And he discovered like a secondary site, and I don't think it was filled with debris, but it did have, like an oval shaped craft. So anyway, Barney Barnett was from Socorro, New Mexico. He died in 1969, but he was reported to have discovered proof positive, or he is purported to have been the first human being to discover proof positive of extraterrestrial life. So to me, like this guy, the guy that discovered like the main vehicle, even though he wasn't the first one to report it, this guy is like basically like a component. Everybody talks about Mac Brazel, but Barney Barnett was like a big part of this too. So right around the time he discovered this vehicle, it was described as an oval-shaped vehicle, these anthropology students were approaching because they had seen it from like a nearby dig or outdoor lecture or something like that. And so they had taken a look at it. One hell of a freaking anthropology discovery, if you ask me. There's a lot of people out there that should get, once this thing goes mainstream, should get credit, even if it's post-mortem. So they interview this guy named Vern Maltais, and he was like Barney Barnett's friend or best friend. And Vern Maltais called him a straight shooter. Again, positive character witness reference. He called him a straight shooter. He said that, he was very surprised to hear Barney transacting in like, UFO rumors, because he said he was also not the type of person to, I guess, get involved in that. And that type of character reference, I think, was important, like in the 90s and before, because as you've heard over and over and over again, for the longest time, it was considered crazy to entertain the ideas of aliens from another world and stuff like that. I think we're past that. I think we're well past that. With the government coming out recently, admitting that basically UFOs are a legitimate phenomenon. They do use the word phenomenon a lot, just saying. But that it's a legitimate phenomenon. They have scientific data. Whatever it is, it's real, but they don't know it. That was like the first level. But now you got Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence. I posted something about this on our Instagram. You got her out there, and she's rocking the idea that, hey, these might be extraterrestrials. She stuttered when she said that. I don't know if she planned to say that. But I don't know. Anyway, so I think we're past that. You're not a nutbag if you're talking about this stuff. It's just super interesting, and we might have, one day a new Columbus moment. Fuck that asshole, by the way. But like a new world moment. I think it would be more apt to say. And we can get into exopolitics later and stuff. Exopolitics is basically the study of political relations between, neighboring civilizations. So we'll get, and that sounds like maybe a good future episode, maybe part of the same series. So, but anyway, so Barney was like the only. I don't know if Vern was the only one that Barney had ever told this to. But this is where we're getting this information from Vern Maltese. And he said that Barney told him that he discovered this crashed oval vehicle, that it had broken open, and that there were approximately four beings laying on the ground outside the vehicle. And that Barney had told Vern that their heads were slightly larger by proportion to their bodies, with strange clothing and slightly sunken eyes. And so there he is. There's Barney out there with this vehicle, with these bodies nearby, and these anthropology students kind of like joining him and investigating it. As they were all investigating this vehicle and those bodies, a group of Army personnel arrived to investigate reports of a downed aircraft which had come by way of aerial surveillance of the area. So, this is a couple days after Mac Brazel had discovered the debris field, right? So by this time, the Army is already becoming aware of it. And so they're going to put, they suggest this on, I think Robert Stack suggests this, as he's narrating the episode. He says that it may have come by way of Mac Brazel's report, because they said, well, if there's a debris field out there and there's no aircraft, there must be an aircraft nearby. Let's do some aerial surveillance, right? And so without Barney Barnett telling anybody about this site, they just show up, right, as he's kind of discovering it with these anthropology students. And, it's suspected that, the Army was aware of it because of aerial surveillance that was initiated because of Mac Brazel's report. So you see this kind of like story starting to build there. The Army's already trying to get ahead of it. So they debrief the people present. They swear them to national security and the whole act, right? Vern stated that I guess he just reinforces Barney's character towards the end of that segment. Then, the Roswell Daily Record shows up, I believe still on the 8th, which would have been the day after, or it might have been the headline from the 9th. I'm trying to get my numbers straight here. But basically the headline read that RAAF, which is Roswell Army Airfield, captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. So this, of course, came about because of Lieutenant Holt's press release, and so it was front page news across the U.S. that next day. Well, if you remember, I said that it was held in Hangar 84. The debris was held in Hangar 84. It made its way from Roswell Army Airfield to Carswell, Texas, and there was a pit stop there, and then it went on to Wright Field in Ohio. So while this cargo plane that was carrying the Brazel wreckage, we'll call it, was heading for its pit stop in Texas, the Army was becoming aware of Barnett's wreckage nearby, right? And so the wreckage that went out to Carswell and on to Wright Pat did not contain the Barney wreckage. It didn't have that vehicle in it. It just had the debris. Nobody's really sure whatever happened to the main vehicle. But there are anecdotes here and there that the writer we brought up earlier, Randall, mentions. And he says that Brigadier General, which is a 1-star general for you civilians, Brigadier General Roger M. Ramey, who was the commanding officer of the 8th Army Air Force in Fort Worth, issued statements. And that's interesting to me, right? He's there in Fort Worth, right? So maybe he saw the wreckage during its pit stop before it took off. Maybe he kept some of it there in Fort Worth. Who knows, right? But he saw this, and he was probably a smarter guy than the colonel over in Roswell. He saw this, and he was like, shit, this is military technology. He was thinking about it like a soldier. Sounds like the other guy was thinking about it like a politician. But this guy thought of it like a soldier. He was being tactical about his judgments. And so shortly after he issued statements, within hours of the wreckage news coming out, and said that the wreckage was that of a weather balloon, right? So here we go back to the size of the debris field, right? I mean, I don't think that this general thought it out. Or maybe he didn't think that we're going to be looking, that the whole public was going to be looking at it through the minutia of a long-form podcast. That's fucking nuts to me. So anyway, Jesse Marcel Jr., who's the son who played with the debris, if you recall, said that his dad had told him that he was ordered to lie about the debris being a crashed weather balloon, and that he had to protect his security clearance. His security clearance as an Air Force major, as an Air Force officer, was paramount. And so, that's what went down. And so of course an Army, officer is going to follow orders, right? And those were the orders of the day. So, and then he talked about it later, in that interview. So I'm not sure what his reasons for that were. But anyway, there were rumors that Brazel was held by the Army until the cover story was circulated and accepted by the public, right? And during the dramatization, you could see that this, old cowboy, this rancher dude, was not amused by being dragged around. But, being a good American, he was doing what he was supposed to be doing. Brazel's neighbor, Floyd Proctor, said that he saw Brazel in town and that he was flanked on either side by Army officers. And, it was Brazel's nature to say hello, to do the traditional cowboy greeting, and he just walked by him. He didn't say anything. He looked at him and just walked right by. And I don't know if it went down like this, but during the dramatization, it shows him getting into this car with these Army officers, and he gave Floyd Proctor a look like, fuck my life, he didn't look like he was having a good time. So, Brazel was probably debriefed, heavily by the Army. And so that was just an interesting thing. Interestingly, our writer friend, our ufologist, Mr. Randall, said that Wright Field, which was the ultimate destination of the Brazel debris, was headquarters for the Air Intelligence Center where everything was possibly being taken or studied by the military. Subsequently, researchers like Mr. Randall, Kevin Randall, may have been, according to Kevin Randall, one of the bodies may have been taken to CIA headquarters in Langley, and another body taken to MacDill Air Force Base, which is also interesting because that's the HQ for the Air Force's airspace medical facility at the time. So, CIA might have been like, an aspect of the intelligence, and then the airspace medical facility might have been like, okay, well, let's learn about these aliens' bodies. Are they, what kind of life are they, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then of course, it's just my own speculation, but I think some stuff may have been taken to Area 51 or held at Roswell. But in terms of like the other two bodies, they're not really sure. Also, it's interesting that, and this is another potential Tiddlecast episode down the future, we need to talk about DUMBs and NTBMs. So DUMBs and NTBMs, those are acronyms. And DUMB stands for Deep Underground Military Base, right? Which that's like a whole fucking other can of worms. And DUMBs are connected by tunnels that have been potentially built up over the years by these machines called NTBMs. And NTBM stands for Nuclear Tunnel Boring Machine. And so a tunnel boring machine is just like a machine that, drills through Earth to make tunnels underground. But the idea of a nuclear tunnel boring machine, and I believe there's U.S. patents that have been filed to back this up. It's a nuclear-powered tunnel boring machine. And the way it works is by melting the rock face and then kind of evenly distributing it amongst the walls as it goes through. You know what I mean? So while it's digging through the earth, it's kind of building the tunnel at the same time. And it's nuclear powered, so it could go on and on and on. So with these machines possibly being in existence, and I think there are some pictures out there of these machines, or at least non-nuclear versions of it. They could have built up, an infrastructure of underground bases over the years. This pops up again and again and again in these paranormal studies. So, could have been held there. It all might be underground, or on the moon or whatever. But we'll have plenty of time to get into all that stuff. I just thought it was an important thing to bring up. Excuse me, my voice is getting dry. So another one of the famous, I guess, researchers here is, damn man, we're coming up on 53. I'm gonna try and hurry here. So Stanton Friedman's a nuclear physicist and ufologist, and he stated that the cover story was the responsible way to go for the country and for the public psyche at that time. We talked a little bit about that. Different time, different thoughts, different way of processing shit. So moving on, in 1984, this document surfaced, right? And there's no chain of custody on it. It was just kind of anonymously mailed to a ufologist. And it's called the Majestic 12 documents. It purports to be to have been established by the president, which I believe would have been Truman at the time. Was it Eisenhower? No, I think it was Truman. He established this committee of 12 men called Majestic 12, and ufologists think that it provides what ensued after the smoke settled in Roswell and Wright Field. And it's basically a manual for how these 12 appointees, presidential appointees, are going to deal with the events. Captain Pappy, that was his call sign, Pappy. Oliver had such a fucking 40s call sign, dude. But anyway, Pappy, Oliver Henderson, allegedly the only person to have seen the UFO occupants apart from the soil conservationist, later came out and disclosed publicly that there were in fact bodies present. He was the pilot that flew the wreckage down to Texas and then on to Wright Field. So, or maybe not. I think that was the second pilot that moved the other shit. But it was interesting. Anyway, his wife, Sappho Henderson, received her testimony 30 years after 1947, which would have been 1981. And Captain Henderson piloted the aircraft that took the wreckage out of Roswell, it says. So yeah, it must have been the second flight, the one with the goods, with the aircraft and the bodies. Our friend Mr. Randall states that the author Randall states that if this story happened, if it's true, it is the most significant event of the millennium, and it is akin to Columbus's discovery of the New World and Queen Isabella not telling the rest of the world about it, keeping it secret. Think about that. Think about that for a minute. If Queen Isabella had decided, oh shit, there's an entire world to be conquered over there. How can I keep this secret? You know what I mean? It might have been like a slower death for the Indians, who knows, but that's somewhat insensitive. They're not dead. It's just, they're severely degraded compared to those days. But anyway, apart from being PA, I'm going to get out of here and just think about that. You know what I mean? What if we didn't know? We know now that these things are real. And when you look at the facts in depth, it seems like they're being piloted, so this is a reality now. I don't want to think about this in terms of like, do you believe in aliens? Nah, fuck the belief issue. This is real. This is happening. Like, incorporate it into your fucking reality. Like, I don't know. I guess it's just I don't mean to be like hardcore, but it's just an issue that I'm passionate about because I'm interested in expanding like the scope of politics. I want to find out what's out there. These are the big questions. The big questions are where the growth and discovery lie. And so that's why I've always been into this kind of shit. But anyway, we're going to get out of here. We're at 57 minutes. And hey, I know Ray wanted to be here, but Ray was sending positive love your way and your family. And you guys have a good Thanksgiving Day weekend. We're going to get out of here.
Lord, visible and sensible, of whom is the presence, soft turning about thee with annual and diurnal motion, source of light, let thy perpetual radiance partner to continual labor and enjoyment, so that as we are constant partakers of thy bounty, we may in our particular orbit give out life and light, sustenance and joy to them that revolve about us, without diminution of substance or effulgence forever. Mm-hmm.